Welcome to the July garden checklist video. This is a little different than our normal one because we're actually down in Loxley, Alabama, filming in a greenhouse, shooting some other video content, and realized it's near the end of the month and we shoot these, what we're doing in our garden back in Raleigh, North Carolina videos each and every month. And there's a playlist on the channel if you want to go back and look at the last, couple. I think the first one we did ever probably is the most detailed one that we've ever done. And since then, we really narrowed it down to what exactly we're doing in our garden. This is going to be kind of a top 10 list. And so this is the 10 things when we get back to Raleigh, right about the time you're seeing this video, the 10 things we're going to concentrate on this during the summertime that are, we want to keep the garden looking great throughout the summer, but we don't necessarily want to be out there every minute of the day during this heat. I'm 9 o'clock in the morning down here in Loxley, Alabama, sweating through my shirt. So, we want to do slightly easier task during the peak of the summer, but we want to maintain our garden so that it comes out the other side of it, as it cools off, looking great. Number one on the top 10 things we'll be thinking about in our garden back in Raleigh is definitely watering. I think watering is going to be the main concern for most folks in their gardens during the peak of the summer. Keep in mind, a lot of things go into what we would call a summer dormancy. They actually slow down some. They're smart enough to not be trying to grow in peak summer. So there may be things out there that will actually require less water of you than you think. You don't have to necessarily keep all of your shrubs trying to grow all summer. Most of them have come out, bloomed earlier in the season, and have put on a flush of growth after the flower, and now they've slowed down a bit in the garden. Your hydrangea paniculatas, like I'm standing in here down in Loxley, Alabama this morning, the ones that are continuing to bloom, these are definitely ones I'm going to keep a closer eye on the watering. Basically, my shrubs that have been in the ground for a while require about an inch of rain a week, or inch of water a week, kind of ideally, same as a lawn really. And we tend to get that, and we get it in heavy thunderstorms, and then and then they move on. If we don't, the things that have been in the ground for a while, I'll check them once a week, and we'll put a sprinkler out over an area or turn on irrigation. If you have some sort of irrigation system, you can turn that on as well, to water those things. If you're choosing to water existing shrubs and trees, ground covers that have been in the ground for a while, when you water them very thoroughly, and then let that area become slightly dry in between those times, because we actually want the plants to actually struggle a tiny bit, okay, to get out. We want them to push roots out into the surrounding area. My annuals and perennials, the things that I'm relying on to bloom all summer long, that have color in the garden all summer long, those I'm going to keep a much closer eye on. They may get watered twice a week. They may get watered if I go 3 days without any rain, 4 days without any rain. Those are the things I'm likely going to go out and probably hand water in some way or another. Your containers become really, really tricky because the further summer goes, the more roots you have in your containers and the more water those containers require. And so as the summer goes on, you're going to be more and more having to pay attention to your containers. You'll be watering them every day, in all likelihood, some 2 times a day. If it reaches that point, you can always pull something out of a container and put it in a slightly larger container. You can do the same thing with your hanging baskets. If you bought a 10 or a 12-inch hanging basket, you can buy a slightly larger hanging basket and pot them into it for the rest of the summer. Some additional soil in there. The plants will be happy. They'll grow. They'll bloom more, and you'll have to water less, which is a huge benefit. And again, sometimes you can. The other strategy I'll use is to cut things back, and so we can take something that is being a giant water hog and just take a third of it right off the top. So we can cut a little bit of that length that's hanging off of our hanging baskets. We can cut back some of the flowering things that are in our containers, just a little bit. Leave them in good shape, leave them looking good, but a little bit of that new growth being taken off of them, they'll require a little less water. Typically when we go out of town, we'll put all of our containers together and then we have somebody come over and water, and that's our strategy to help them be more confident about what needs to be watered. And we have a couple different sections, one that needs to be watered a little less and one that needs to be watered a little more. So if you're asking someone for help with water while you're out of town, that's a good idea to gather them all together in a space. A couple other thoughts on watering. When you water containers, water them till the water kind of flows out of the bottom of them, because my next point coming up is about fertilizer, and we want to make sure we're leaching fertilizer out of our containers. If you water just a little bit and don't let the water come out of the bottom, you will build up salts from your fertilizer potentially in there, and that can be damaging to your plants. We would always, during the winter months at the nursery, the plants wouldn't need all that much water, but occasionally we would flush the containers anyway. We just needed to get the salts out of the bottom of the container. So that's a thought if you are doing ongoing fertilizing on those things. Again, things that have been in the ground for 3 or 4 years at this point, we're trying to give them as little as possible, and we are always checking before we water. We don't water because it's Tuesday at 9 o'clock in the morning, and that's when the timer comes on our irrigation system. We water because we've gone out, visually checked, visually inspected, and once we've determined something needs water, we're watering it thoroughly and then letting it dry out between rains and waterings. That's kind of the key to success with these things. Also, one other quick point on watering: if a plant becomes damaged in some way, so let's say you bring home one of those hydrangeas that I was just showing up there, and oops, we forgot to water it for 2 or 3 days. It was a total water hog because it had been in bloom. Once it goes through some sort of damage where it's lost some interior leaves or the flowers start to die back, it will require less water. Even though the problem was it needed a lot of water that caused the issue, it will now need less. And so it's very, very easy to overwater plants and kill them with water once they become stressed. Once they become stressed, they are going to use far less water. So number 2 on our summer list is going to be to fertilize the things that are summer annuals and maybe some of our perennials as well. So the vegetable garden is going to get another round of fertilizer in June. Our annual flowers throughout the garden are going to get another application, and our containers are going to get another application. If we had hanging baskets, they would as well. And that was what I was talking about occasionally watering them thoroughly enough containers to allow water to wash out of them and wash some of that salt out of your containers. We definitely want to get the most out of those short-lived flowering things as we possibly can, and that's why we do a second fertilizing. All of our other shrubs and trees and things got fertilized earlier in the year, and we're just not thinking about them. The mulch that we're using in our beds is breaking down. Our microbial activity in the soil is helping bring water and helping bring nutrients to our plants. They're fine. They don't need any additional fertilizer. Most of the time people are using too much fertilizer when they are fertilizing. Our containers, we really only do a couple times a year. I don't want my containers growing so fast that I'm watering them 3 times a day. I want my containers to grow slow and steady and, give me the flowers that I want, but I don't need them to get this big in the container and then have to prune them and water them and water them and fertilize them and fertilize them. I don't want to go through that battle. I'd rather put a shrub in a container that's kind of low needs with a few flowering things around it and call it done and not have to, not push them and push them and push them. So again, I think most of the recommendations for fertilizing on containers is just too much. Same thing in your vegetable garden. Slow and steady, slow and steady. I have more tomato plants than I could ever eat the tomatoes off of. I don't need them to give me 1,000,000 tomatoes at once. I want slow, steady growth. So there's always tomatoes to pick out there, but the plants aren't being pressed and pushed so hard that they become diseased and insect prone from being under stress. Number 3 on the midsummer maintenance list is weeding. Weeding, is a 12-month of the year thing. There's no real way. Everybody wants a shortcut to never have to weed the garden again, and there really isn't. It's just one of those things that comes with gardening. But by weeding throughout the year, every month, and trying to keep them from ever coming to seed, you can lower your seed bank that's in your garden. Remember, you bought a new house. They moved soil all over the place. Things were allowed to grow however they grew. Your garden comes with a seed bank. It comes with a certain amount, and some of the shrubs you buy too. They come with a seed bank of weeds, and we want to lower that seed bank over time. And we do that by every single time we see a weed coming up, we pull it before it has a chance to seed itself. That's one seed gone, right? You'll never get rid of all of them, but you can over time lower your seed bank. And this is a strategy that many gardens try to use everywhere, is that if we can just lower the seed bank, it's less work over the years, but it will never ever stop. Some of our summer weeds can really take over the beds in a hurry. Other times of the year, we'll get weeds that really start off kind of slow and build over time. But things like crabgrass can come up, be a very small weed in the garden for about 2 or 3 weeks as it builds a root system, and then it can just absolutely take over a bed, start, throwing seeds in there pretty quickly. Bahia, all kinds of things can do that. Definitely don't want Bermuda grass to run too far up in your beds before you try to tackle it, because it really becomes harder and harder to get control over them. So some ongoing weeding. I don't recommend anybody go outside and spend 6 hours on a Saturday weeding. I think that's just going to take the fun out of gardening. I would suggest, getting up in the morning or in the evening, pulling some weeds here and there, just kind of tackling a small space. Enjoy the time that you're out there, and just kind of control it in an ongoing fashion rather than it being something that's on a whiteboard somewhere written where you got to weed, and it just seems like such a terrible task. So we handle weeding by, we're standing out there talking about the garden, we're having a cup of coffee, we're enjoying it, and I'll reach down and pull 5 or 6, ivy is our, we've got English ivy seeds throughout the garden. And Steph will pull something else over there during the conversation, and it doesn't become, it didn't seem like a real task. It seemed like part of of an enjoyable day out in the garden. But definitely, no matter what month it is, be getting those weeds out before they come to seed, because that one seed can become thousands of seeds on many of our weeds if we don't get them early. Number 4 is pruning and deadheading. There's a lot of cutting on things that we can do during middle summer. Before I moved on from a new spot, I figured I was going to get questioned about what this is. This is Royal Hawaiian Waikiki Colocasia. It's an elephant ear, beautiful color. The leaf unfolds and it has a yellow mid-vein, and then that yellow mid-vein develops pink in the center of it. Incredibly showy plant. We have one in the garden back at the house. So on to deadheading. So a lot of before we left the house to come down here, we went through and cut about 1/3 of our annuals back. So we take them about 1/3 down. We take most of the flowers off of them. We don't do them all at one time because it's a pollinator garden and we don't want to take all the flowers away from them. So about every week and a half, we'll take about 1/3 of our annuals and cut 1/3 off the top of them. It lowers the amount of water they're going to need, and it fills them out bigger, better, fuller, bushier, more flowers as the summer comes on. So it's a good strategy. Again, we don't do them all at the same time. An example of one that can be done like that is this is a Plectranthus, and you can see this one. Beautiful purple flowers on it. This is Mona purple. Great foliage plant and great flowering plant. As these flowers start to slow down, you can prune it down just like this. Take its head, just off with its head. That's what somebody did with this one. It's already got new growth on it. Buds are starting to come on it. Again, they're in 2 separate groups back here. One that's in full flower and part of this group that's been cut back. So they always have a cycle of ones that are coming into full peak flower and ones that are going out. This Gerbera daisy is a great example of a plant. These new Gerbera daisies out in the world now will bloom all summer long. They're incredible plants. I was never a giant Gerbera daisy fan, and now some of these new ones are just absolutely amazing. But I'll take these spent flowers and cut them down into the plant. Cut them with something clean. Don't pull them off like I just did, but take a nice pair of sharp shears and prune that back. It'll look neater, and it will also help it keep flowering during the summertime. The other thing to do this on is in the vegetable garden as well. You can, if you're finding in the vegetable garden that you're having to water and water and water, you can slow some of your plants down with a little bit of pruning on them as well. So we're using this pruning technique for slowing things down a bit, and allowing them to fill in a bit more, maybe use a little less water when we go on vacation. You can cut them right before you leave and know that your neighbor won't have to give those quite as much water while you're gone. We also use the strategy of these things that will bloom all summer. We can keep deadheading them, and that will encourage more flowers. Agapanthus is a great example of that. Once these things think they've set flowers, once they think they've set seed, frequently they'll slow down. So again, we will do a lot of, butterfly bush is another great example of that. As the flowers decline, you can snip them off. You'll get side branches. You'll get additional flowers throughout the summer. This colocasia is called Black Ripple. It's another Southern Living Plant Collection one. It's really amazing Amazing black foliage on that one. I need one of these in my life for sure. Number 5 on the list is keep picking. And that goes back to that deadheading thing. So these agapanthus have had a lot of flower spikes on them recently. If we go down here and deadhead them, prevent them from producing seed, they'll continue to flower for us. It's the exact same thing out in your vegetable garden. You need to keep picking because, you know, even if you leave town, you know, if your tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, squash, zucchini, okra, whatever the heck it is, if they fully formed seeds in big giant fruit, they may in fact think that they're kind of done for the season. They've produced all that they need to produce. By keep picking them, you keep fooling them, and they just keep flowering and they just keep producing throughout the season. So make sure, even if you leave town, you know, for a week, invite your neighbors over and say, hey, if you'll water a couple containers for me, you can have all the squash and zucchini and peppers and tomatoes that are ready in the garden while we're gone. They'll be doing you a big favor, getting them out and then producing more. And that will produce more, hopefully right up until the fall. Number 6 is pest. As the summer comes on in any garden, the insects kind of take over the world. We go from the bird songs of spring to the evening sounds of insects in the background in all of my videos. And some of them like to come down in our gardens and munch on things a bit. We do nothing for them pretty much. What we've done is we've tried to create a system in our garden where the plants are healthy. They're not overwatered or underwatered or over-fertilized or pushed too hard. They're not, and we have tons and tons of species, okay, throughout our garden. We haven't relied on one giant group of one thing that if it gets some problem, it's going to be problematic for my garden, right? If I have something, if I have 50 of something and it gets a problem, you know, it's a giant piece of my garden, and that's gonna, perhaps make me make different decisions than I can currently make. Currently, I get aphids on a grapevine and I go, so what? I can hose them off with my water hose temporarily, or I can wait for a few days and just see what happens. Had this happen last year, they disappeared almost immediately. We get a few, we know we're going to have, issues on our brassicas. We've got those little white butterflies flying around. And they come and lay eggs on all of our brassicas in our garden. So our fall vegetable garden, we typically will put some sort of netting over it, over our broccoli and kale and every single brassica that we grow out in our vegetable garden. We just kind of know this event is coming, and so we prepare for it. But other than that, we just don't do anything. We've got some powdery mildew on a couple of our Monarda or our bee balm at the house. It's mostly in the bottom part of the plant. The top of the plant's still performing well. We've got it underplanted with some other things to kind of cover up the naked bottom part that has a little bit of powdery mildew, and we don't worry about it. If it's something that's giving us an ongoing issue where something just keeps destroying it virtually every year, I'm going to get rid of it. We are lucky, I will say overall, we don't have a Japanese beetle issue in our neighborhood because we don't have a lot of turf. Full sun turf areas are the perfect place for Japanese beetles to really establish themselves within a neighborhood. So if if you go out your front door and all your neighbors got lawns everywhere and it's all out in the full sun, you probably have Japanese beetle issues. And they can be an extremely frustrating thing to garden with. I understand that. Plant a shade tree. It will definitely help in the long haul to convert some of that lawn, over to bed space. Because again, our neighborhood, virtually no Japanese beetles. There is lawn here and there. A little bit of it's in the full sun here or there. They just don't have a great space to really establish themselves. But again, for pests in the summer, we basically do nothing. We'll use a water hose to hose things off. If I had caterpillars on my tomatoes in the garden, I'd likely put on a glove and pick them off and throw them away that way. We keep all of our containers up off the ground. That's super important for snails and slugs. Snails and slugs can definitely be an issue, especially when we're out there doing additional watering. I talked about watering earlier, and every time we water, it's an opportunity for snails and slugs to have a home under a container or hiding spaces in the garden. And we also keep the place clean. Keep that in mind when when we're pruning off our plants, when we're picking weeds, pulling things away from plants, making sure the ground is just in general a clean space, because those are hiding places for potential pests. Number 7 is planting, and I realize a lot of folks, depending on where you are and how hot it is outside, might have finished your planting at this point and put that task aside. We'll plant 12 months out of the year, though, in our Raleigh, North Carolina Zone 7B garden. I would encourage you, if you plan on putting in ornamental grasses or any plants that might be marginal in your area, meaning that, they could be winter tender, to get those in as soon as possible. So any of those things need to be done sooner the better. Fall planting some of those things. A lot of times the grasses will stay too wet during the winter time if they're not rooted in a bit. Some of our tender things, you're stressing them when they go in the ground in the fall, and then they get the winter cold, can do some significant damage to them. So the earlier you can get those things in, the better. If you go shopping right now, and I'm going to talk about that later in the video, and you come home with this beautiful white wedding hydrangea that's in full bloom, and it's just absolutely stunningly beautiful, it's a very cold hardy plant. There's really no reason to rush out and plant that thing. I'd probably enjoy those flowers in that container. It's going to be very difficult for that thing to go through the transition of you pulling it out of the container, breaking up the roots, putting it in the ground, putting mulch around it, and then watering it in, and it maintaining those flowers as well. So either two things. One, I would give it a haircut and just take the flowers off if you need to get it in the ground faster than if you need to get it in the ground fast. If not, just enjoy the flowers in the container. Keep it watered as a container plant. As they start to fade, you can cut them off later in the summer and then plant the plant in the ground. I think that's the wisest decision, because it's very difficult for a plant to do both, be transplanted and continue to flower well. Again, any woody shrub, we're going to put it in the ground, and we're going to go, if we see something, we're going to take some plants home from here. I would rather have them in the ground than have them in a container. I talked about how much I have to water containers versus things in the ground. So I'd like to get them in the ground as quick as possible. I can water them in well and then check them every few days as they establish themselves. There's some great gardeners out there that will tell you that herbaceous perennials, the roots are actively growing on them during the heat of the summer. Some of our shrubs will kind of go into a semi-dormancy, but the perennials that bloom all summer long, let's say Gara is an example of that, coneflower is an example of that. They're actively growing roots in the midsummer, and they can actually transition into the ground really, really easily during summer heat. I know it's difficult for us to be in the garden, but some of those full sun perennials that you think, it's probably not a great day to put them in the ground, no problem at all. Again, I would probably take the flowers off of them initially just to ease up a little bit of the stress on them. But it's amazing how fast perennials can establish themselves in a hot summer day. Magic Mona Purple Plectranthus and the colocasia back here, the Waikiki colocasia, just a beautiful, both are beautiful plants. Number 8 on the list is observation. I think this is a very, very important thing, and it doesn't require sweating to do it. You can go out in the morning and observe how the varieties of tomatoes that you're growing are for the summer. We'll do a taste test. We bring in, I think last year we had 8 or 10. Steph brought them in a blind taste test, and we, and knew which ones they were. And I did the same for her, and we, just kind of compared. And, is this a good one? Is it one that we want to regrow? And we'll keep, 4 or 5 of our tomato varieties year over year, and then we'll try 4 or 5 new ones every year. So it's an evaluation we're doing of just tomatoes. But we'll do the same thing for all of the annuals that we're planting. The annuals, where we got the seed from, what varieties of zinnias that we're growing this year, either the miniature zinnias or the taller growing zinnias, how they performed in the garden, perennials that we've put in. And we're just trying to, it's not like we're doing 800 pages of notes. It's just more you walk out and you go, well, that thing's pretty good. Let's make sure we remember it and write that one down, okay? Or that thing seems to be underperforming. And then I'll maybe go through a couple questions in my mind. Am I underwatering it? If I put it in too wet of an area? Or is it just not a plant that performs well in my garden? May perform well in somebody else's garden, but not mine. That's an opportunity. I look at it as an opportunity for next year for us when we're shopping for annual seeds or looking at perennials or maybe a ground cover or shrub or whatever we can plug into that spot the next year. Because we're on a 0.19 acre lot and things are going to need to evolve and change to keep it interesting, because that's what's interesting for us is some change year to year. So observe and learn from your successes and your failures, because really that's the best way to ultimately hone your gardening skills, is to try to figure out what it was. Why did it underperform? Why is it perform? Even ask yourself why it's performing well. What did I do different there than I did over there? And those things will help you in the future gardening endeavors. I'm in an ocean of Everillo Carex. These are actually in trays. I think they are 32 cell trays of Everillos. These will get potted into 1 gallons and then they'll be in stores all over the place. It's quite a few of them. You might be able to see that Lamandra over there, that Platinum Beauty Lamandra. We've had in a container for a couple of years at the house. We have one in a container this year as well. Great, really great plant as well. Grassy-like plant that's super drought tolerant. If you don't want to water your containers all that much, I highly recommend the Platinum Beauty Lamandra. It can take all kinds of abuse in a container. Number 9 is preparing for fall, and then I would even add preparing for next spring as well to that list, because there have been so many new gardeners since the pandemic that we've continued to see some shortages in plants and some shortages in seed. So if you're planning something for the fall, I would definitely be buying seeds right now, and I would even think about buying shrubs or trees in perennials, annuals, even things you're going to put into your fall garden. Even if you're not going to plant them right now, you can find a park shade space for them and keep them in good shape until fall. Because we've been in a bunch of nurseries. I've been in a bunch of nurseries this year, and I really thought that we were going to see a turnaround and see a bit of a glut in the nursery business pretty quickly. I thought the new gardener thing was going to fade a bit. Just in my mind, I'm thinking, I was in the nursery business for 20 some years. So in my mind, I'm always thinking worst case scenario. And I think what we've seen is that it just continued to go up. And we're seeing lots of bare plastic and bare gravel in these nurseries. They're not able to fill them back in 4 years now. They're 3.5 years. It's absolutely amazing. I'm amazed at how many new gardeners continue to add to their gardens and are excited by it. And it's fun. It's a lot of fun. But again, there still is a shortage. And some of the things that I show you on the channel, or you might be looking at other YouTube channels, they're going to continue to be in short demand for a little while. That's for sure. It just appears that folks are sticking around the house and enjoying this hobby that they picked up during the pandemic. So acquire things, think about your plans out in the future, and make sure you're ahead of the other people that are going to be out shopping, and you will have already bought yours. Before I move to 10, I'm going to give you one little piece of caution. I always talk about mulching in all these videos. If you haven't mulched, I want to mulch in the late winter and in the fall, typically with a little less than most people use. I probably use about 2.5 inches of mulch twice a year, and that's part of my weed control. Be cautious mulching in midsummer, because that mulch has been piled up on top of itself. It can be in the process of doing a little bit of composting and really building heat within that pile. So, if you're gonna mulch, sometimes I'll wheelbarrow it over places and just leave it in the wheelbarrowed piles for a little while and let it cool off a little bit, come down to whatever the natural temperature is outside. But those piles of mulch can be quite hot, and in all not likely, but possible, do possible damage to your plants, your existing plants. Number 10 is visiting gardens, visiting garden centers, visiting box stores, wherever it is you buy your plants or wherever it is you go outside and enjoy plants. So rather than, going outside and sweating in your own garden, you can walk around some other place in a pleasant way with a water and enjoy it. So we're down here in Loxley, Alabama, doing some video content, visiting friends, and several other things that you guys will see from this trip. And we run into this sweet starlight hydrangea paniculata. This is a new one Southern Living Plant Collection has, that it starts off green like a lot of the paniculatas and then turns bright white, and then this one will get that pink hue to it even further south, which is an issue for a lot of our hydrangeas that are supposed to have an additional color up, where they go from white to either pinks or shades of red or whatever. A lot of them don't do that very well unless we have cool nighttime temperatures, which they tend to have up in the north and not down in the south. Some plant breeding going on to introduce that into our southern gardens as well, and these are turning a shade of pink as we speak. So again, that visiting places. So I visited a place, I found a new plant. And so you can do the same thing, and it's something that you might discover in a public garden that's doing well in your area. If you're in an area that's had extremely tough weather conditions for a few years now. If you're in those Texas area, you're in that Nashville area in Tennessee, where I know a lot of leafy evergreens got damaged during that winter freeze. There are bound to be things in your area. I mean, we did a video at Cheekwood last year. Go over to Cheekwood, spend the day there, spend a half a day there and enjoy that beautiful garden. And at the same time, write down some things in the garden that clearly withstood that freeze and really held up well through the cold. Same thing down in Texas, if you're in Houston or any of these very kind of difficult to garden areas where you have extremes in temperature, extremes in rainfall, extremes in wind, extremes in cold, whatever it is, go out and examine the gardens around you and see what's doing well in those extreme conditions. So thank you guys very much for following along. There's the 10 things we're gonna be thinking about in our garden and doing this summer. Number 10, we're doing right this second as I'm filming this, enjoying plants in a nursery setting, and we're gonna do the same thing in some friends' gardens down here in the Gulf. So thanks for following along.